Michael watched as his life unfolded in an opulent banquet hall filled with sparkling lights, elegant flower arrangements, and lavish decor, a testament to the success he'd worked so hard to achieve. Dressed in a sharp tuxedo, he stood at the center of a lively crowd of guests in designer outfits, all laughing and toasting. His stunning bride, Chloe, shone in a custom-made gown as she mingled with the elite. Yet even amid all the glamour, Michael felt a strange unease. He couldn't help but recall the simpler days of his past, when wealth and status weren't the focus of his life. That lingering feeling of discomfort kept nagging at him as he tried to enjoy his wedding day. As Chloe basked in the adoration of their guests, Michael's mind drifted back to the long, challenging road that had brought him from humble beginnings to a thriving business empire, a journey marked by both admiration and envy. The cost of his ambition was a burden he rarely acknowledged, and as he glanced at Chloe, who was chatting with a high-profile guest, a pang of guilt hit him. Even though he tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the celebration, a heavy sense of something unspoken weighed on him throughout the night. Everything changed when Michael spotted a familiar face among the catering staff. There, bent over a table, was a woman he recognized, Emma, his ex-wife. She was carefully wiping down the table, her hair tied back in a messy bun that framed a face he once knew so well. For a moment, Michael wondered if he was imagining things. Seeing Emma, his ex, at his own wedding was almost unbelievable. But as she straightened up and set down a tray, her dark complexion, tired eyes, and unmistakable features confirmed her identity. Then his eyes caught sight of her swollen belly, and his breath hitched. Emma was pregnant. At first, she didn't seem to notice him, so focused was she on her task. But as Michael continued staring, unable to look away, Emma finally turned, and their eyes locked. The shock on her face mirrored his own, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if regaining control, Emma quickly averted her gaze and slipped away into the crowd of servers. Michael stood rooted in place, his mind flooded with questions. Why was Emma here? How could this be happening on his wedding day? And most pressing of all, whose child was she carrying? The rest of the reception blurred into a haze. Michael no longer focused on Chloe or the other guests. His eyes darted around in search of Emma, but she was nowhere to be seen. A jumble of anger, guilt, and confusion roiled inside him. He tried to convince himself that it was just curiosity, but deep down, he knew Emma's unexpected appearance reopened a chapter he thought was long closed. A chapter filled with memories of love, loss, and regret. Sitting at the head table, Michael's thoughts spiraled back to the days when Emma had meant everything to him. He recalled the first time he had met her at a small cafe near his college campus, her laughter and infectious smile lighting up the room. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, grounded, compassionate, and endlessly supportive of his dreams. Their romance had been passionate and intense, but it wasn't without its difficulties. They married young and full of hope, yet neither was fully prepared for the hardships that life would throw their way. As Michael's ambitions grew, the distance between them widened. He had thrown himself into his work so completely that Emma was left to cope on her own. He had convinced himself that it was all for their future, but in reality, his own insecurities had driven him to prove his worth. Emma had tried to hold on, but over time, the cracks in their relationship had deepened. Michael remembered the heated arguments, the nights Emma had cried herself to sleep while he remained absorbed in his office, and the day she finally left, telling him she couldn't stay in a marriage where she felt invisible. Even though he hadn't stopped her, too proud to admit his mistakes, now, seeing her at his wedding, pregnant and working as a server, the guilt overwhelmed him. He had convinced himself he had moved on, but Emma's presence stirred up old wounds he thought were long healed. Unable to let the night pass without confronting his past, Michael decided he needed answers. After scanning the venue for what felt like hours, he finally found Emma near the kitchen entrance, quietly stacking empty trays. She seemed smaller, more fragile than he remembered. though an inner strength still shone through her tired eyes. Heart pounding, he approached her carefully and whispered her name. Emma tensed for a moment before turning to face him, her expression guarded and her eyes a mix of surprise and defiance. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice harsh yet laced with concern. Emma straightened her shoulders and replied, "Coolly, I'm working, Michael. That much is clear," though her tone betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Michael's emotions surged, anger, guilt, and a fierce need to protect her. "At my wedding? Why would you put yourself in this situation?" he pressed, struggling to understand why she hadn't simply left when she saw his name on the guest list. Emma's lips tightened as she shook her head. "I had no choice. Not everyone lives in luxury, Michael. Some of us have to take whatever work we can get." Her words cut through him like a knife. He searched her face for any sign of the woman he once loved, but all he saw was exhaustion and pain. Before he could ask anything more, she stepped back, resting a protective hand on her belly, and said simply, "I've got work to do," before turning away. For the rest of the evening, Michael replayed the encounter in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma, the baby she was carrying, and the haunting question of what had happened to her since their divorce. Why was she working as a server when she deserved so much more? And most importantly, was the baby his? The thought twisted his stomach into knots. Deep down, he knew that if the baby was his, he had failed her in more ways than he could admit. The next morning, Michael paced around his office, torn between anger and remorse. Despite trying to focus on his work, his mind kept drifting back to Emma's words, "Some of us have to take whatever we can get." He hated that she'd been reduced to this, yet he couldn't escape the reality that his own choices had contributed to her struggles. His relentless pursuit of success had cost him their marriage and, it seemed, had hurt her even more. He considered calling her, but then hesitated. What would he say? How could he bring up all the painful questions without reopening old wounds? Despite his inner turmoil, he decided he needed to find a way to speak with her again, to know the truth not just for his own peace of mind, but because he owed her an apology and maybe even a chance to make things right. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if Emma would ever forgive him for his role in her suffering. Meanwhile, at the wedding reception, Chloe began noticing Michael's distraction. At first, she assumed it was just the natural post-wedding tiredness. But as days passed, his behavior grew increasingly odd. He spent long hours in his office, staring blankly out the window or pacing, and whenever she tried to talk to him, he brushed her off with vague excuses. Chloe prided herself on understanding people, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Michael was hiding something big. One evening over dinner, she gently confronted him. "You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" Startled, he forced a smile and replied, "It's just work stress. You know how it is." Chloe studied him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way he avoided meeting her eyes. "Are you sure that's all it is?" she pressed softly. Michael hesitated for a moment before curtly answering, "I'm fine, Chloe. Can't we just enjoy dinner?" Though she didn't push further, the seed of doubt had been planted, and she vowed to keep a closer watch on him. As the evening wound down, Michael couldn't shake the image of Emma from his mind. Even as guests lingered and soft music played, in the background he felt detached, as if he were watching his own life from afar. Sitting in a quiet corner with a now flat glass of champagne, his thoughts were consumed by the unexpected encounter. The lavish wedding that he had built his life around now seemed tainted by the reality that someone he once loved was suffering. As the staff began clearing tables, Michael discreetly approached a young server and asked quietly, "Do you know anything about her?" The server, looking around nervously, replied, "You mean Emma? She's been having a rough time, sir. She only took this job because she needed the money. I heard her landlord was threatening to evict her." Michael's heart clenched with a mix of anger and shame at the thought of how far Emma's life had fallen. Returning to Chloe, Michael felt the weight of his discovery. Chloe, radiant and laughing with friends, was a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside him. On their way to their honeymoon suite, Chloe chatted happily about how perfect the day had been. But Michael's mind was elsewhere, on Emma, the baby, and the life he had left behind. His guilt made him feel like the perfect celebration was nothing more than a cruel irony. That night, unable to sleep as Chloe drifted off beside him, Michael lay awake, his thoughts tangled in memories and emotions. He remembered how quickly love had turned into regret, how Emma had once been the center of his world, supporting him as he built his business, only to be cast aside when his ambition took over. He recalled the long nights, missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and broken promises. By the time he realized what he was losing, it was too late. Emma had left, and the pain of that loss was as raw now as it had been then. And now, the possibility that the child she carried might be his filled him with both terror and excitement. Determined to face the truth, Michael decided to take action. He managed to track down Emma's address through the event coordinator who had booked the catering. The information unsettled him. Emma lived in a rundown apartment on the edge of the city, a far cry from the life of comfort he'd once imagined for her. The thought of her struggling in such harsh conditions tightened his chest. Unsure whether to visit unannounced, he finally drove to her apartment that evening. Parking his sleek car on cracked pavement under dim streetlights, he hesitated before knocking on the door. His heart pounded as he stood on the threshold, wondering how he would face the pain he'd caused. When the door opened, Emma appeared, with a mix of surprise and guardedness. "Michael," she said coolly, "what are you doing here?" He took a deep breath, glancing at her rounded belly, and said softly, "I need to know, Emma. Is the baby mine?" After a tense, charged moment at the door, Emma hesitated before letting him into her small, sparsely furnished apartment. The space was modest, a worn couch, a scratched coffee table, and a faded rug, with only the hum of an old refrigerator breaking the silence. Michael couldn't reconcile this reality with the woman he once knew, a woman who had dreamed of building a beautiful home. Emma crossed her arms and leaned against the door, her posture defensive. "You got what you came for, so take a good look and leave," she said coldly. Michael ignored her harsh tone, his eyes drawn to a small crib in the corner, and asked, his voice thick with emotion, "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma scoffed. "Why would it matter? I'm barely getting by carrying a child while juggling odd jobs. What difference would it have made?" Michael replied, "You made it clear long ago that I wasn't a priority." Her words stung, and Michael struggled to respond. He had no excuse for his past behavior, and the guilt was almost too much to bear. "I want to help," he said, softly, stepping closer. Emma fixed him with a hard stare and snapped, "I don't need your pity. I've managed on my own, and I will continue to do so." But as she turned away, Michael saw the pain in her eyes and knew she wasn't as strong as she pretended to be. Determined to get answers, Michael pressed on, "I'm not here to pity you, Emma. I just need to know, am I the father?" Emma stood silent for a long moment, then slowly turned, her arms still crossed protectively over her chest. "Yes," she whispered, the confirmation hitting Michael like a freight train. He sank heavily onto the couch, overwhelmed. "How long have you known?" he asked after a pause, his voice laced with hurt. "Since the day I found out," Emma replied, anger flashing in her eyes. "But why does it matter? You were too busy building your empire, planning your perfect wedding. You never cared." Her words stung, and Michael felt fresh guilt wash over him. "That's not fair," he murmured. "You never gave me the chance to care. I wasn't even asked." Emma's tone softened a bit, but she remained firm. I didn't want you feeling obligated. I've been through enough. I never wanted to beg for scraps of your attention. Michael's chest tightened as her raw emotion struck him. I'm not asking for a second chance, he said quietly. I just want to be there for the baby, for both of you. Please let me help. Emma hesitated, clearly torn. We'll see, she finally said, her voice low. But don't make promises you can't keep. The drive back to his mansion was a blur for Michael as he replayed their conversation over and over. The weight of Emma's words pressed on him. He felt he had failed her once again, and now there was an innocent child involved, possibly his. For years, he had buried himself in work, thinking that success would atone for his mistakes. Yet, at the peak of his career, he felt more like a failure than ever. The memory of Emma's tired eyes and modest apartment haunted him, and he couldn't escape the feeling of impending disappointment. When Michael returned home, Chloe was waiting in the living room, her tone light but curious. You're late. Unsure how to explain his absence, he mumbled something vague about getting caught up with work. Chloe frowned, sensing something was off. Michael, what's going on? You've been distracted since the wedding. Are you hiding something? Her words churned his stomach, but he couldn't tell her about Emma, not yet. Revealing the truth would shatter the perfect image of their life, and he wasn't ready for that fallout. It's just work stress, he lied with a forced smile. It'll pass, he added, though Chloe wasn't convinced. She let the topic drop as she went upstairs. Later that night, Michael sat on the couch with his head in his hands, feeling trapped between the life he had built with Chloe and the responsibility he felt toward Emma and their unborn child. For the first time in years, he felt utterly lost. But one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore what was happening with Emma. No matter how hard it was, he had to find a way to make things right without ruining everything else. Chloe, who prided herself on understanding people, had begun noticing a change in Michael. Since the wedding, he had become withdrawn and preoccupied. At first, she chalked it up to the stress of a new beginning. But as the days turned into weeks, his absences grew longer, and his excuses for business meetings or errands sounded rehearsed and hollow. She felt like a stranger in her own marriage, and decided one evening at dinner to test him. How was your day? You've been out a lot lately. Caught off guard, Michael hesitated before replying, It's been hectic, just tying up loose ends at work. His response was too quick, too calculated, and Chloe noticed his hand clenching around his glass. You're working late a lot, aren't you? She pressed softly. Michael gave a small, forced smile. You know how it is. Deadlines wait for no one. Yet Chloe wasn't satisfied. Having known him for so long, she sensed he was keeping something significant from her. That night, as Michael showered, Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. She wanted to trust him, but an unsettling feeling told her there was a secret he wasn't sharing. Determined to uncover the truth, she resolved to keep a closer watch on him. Despite his internal struggle, Michael found himself drawn back to Emma's apartment again and again. At first, he told himself it was solely for the baby's sake, that he needed to ensure the child would have a better life than Emma's current situation. But deep down, every visit stirred up memories of the woman he had once loved. He began leaving small tokens, groceries, little gifts for the baby, even money, though Emma often refused them outright. On one visit, he noticed how exhausted she looked, her swollen feet resting on an old chair. You shouldn't be working like this, he said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. Emma shot him a sharp look. And what do you suggest? That I wait around for you to rescue? Me? I don't need your charity. Michael insisted. It's not charity, it's responsibility. That baby is mine, and I'm not going to let you struggle alone. Their conversations usually ended in tension, with Emma's pride clashing against Michael's determination to help. Yet, Over time, her resistance began to soften, and she reluctantly accepted small gestures: a ride to her doctor's appointment, a few hours of help around the house. Though their dynamic was far from perfect, Michael's consistent presence started to chip away at the barriers Emma had built. One evening, as they sat in her modest living room, Emma finally opened up in a way Michael hadn't expected. Seated on the worn couch with her hand resting on her rounded belly, she asked quietly, "Michael, do you know what it was like? Watching you chase your dreams while I felt like I was fading away." Taken aback, he stammered, "I never meant to make you feel that way." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "I know you didn't, but that doesn't change what happened." She went on to recall the loneliness and pain of their marriage, the long nights he spent away on business trips, the missed dinners, the moments when she felt nothing more than an afterthought. "I wanted to support you, Michael. I believed in us, but somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like your wife," she said, her voice breaking with raw emotion. Michael listened silently, his heart heavy with regret. "I don't want your pity," Emma said, wiping away a tear. "I've made peace with the past, but I can't have you coming in and out of my life whenever it suits you. This baby deserves better. I deserve better." Her words struck him hard, and he realized that earning her trust now would be the toughest challenge he'd ever face. "I won't ask for a second chance," he murmured, "but I do want to be there for the baby, and for you. Please let me help." As days passed, the tension between Michael and Chloe grew. Chloe noticed that Michael's excuses for being late were growing weaker, and his distracted demeanor during their conversations was unmistakable. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Chloe finally confronted him. "Michael, I need to know what's going on. You've been so distant lately, and I feel like I'm losing you." Startled, Michael looked up from his phone. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, his tone unconvincing. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend everything's okay when it's not. You've been acting odd since the wedding. Please be honest with me." For a long moment, Michael considered confessing everything about Emma, the baby, and the overwhelming guilt that had haunted him since that night. But fear kept him silent. "It's just work," he finally said, avoiding her gaze. "I've got a lot on my plate." "Right now?" Chloe wasn't convinced, and as Michael retreated upstairs, a seed of doubt took root in her heart. She had always believed their marriage was solid, but now she wasn't so sure, and her determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger. Meanwhile, Michael found himself daydreaming about a future he'd never imagined, a future with Emma and the baby she was carrying. His visits to her apartment became a regular part of his routine, and although their interactions were often tense, he increasingly felt a deep responsibility toward her well-being. He began picturing himself as a father, holding the baby for the first time, teaching her to walk, and being there for every milestone. The idea filled him with both excitement and fear. He had spent so long chasing success that he had never really considered what it meant to build a family. One evening, while sitting with Emma on her worn-out couch, he mustered the courage to share his thoughts. "I want to be there for the baby," he said softly, his eyes fixed on a small crib in the corner. "Not just financially, but in every way. I want to be part of their life." Emma looked at him, her face unreadable. "You're saying that now?" she replied cautiously. "But what happens when things get tough? What happens when your other life starts demanding more of your time?" Her words stung because they were true. Michael knew he had a history of putting work above all else, but this time he was determined to prove he'd changed. "I'm not the same man I was when we were married," he said earnestly. "I know I let you down before, but I won't let the baby down. I promise I won't let you down." Emma's eyes softened just a bit, though she still remained guarded. "We'll see," she said, adding, "actions speak louder than words." Even as Michael's involvement grew, Emma still struggled to fully trust him. The scars from their past ran deep, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he might slip away again. She appreciated his efforts, his frequent visits, the groceries he brought, his insistence on helping with errands, but a lingering fear remained. What if his support was only temporary? One afternoon, as Michael helped her set up a second-hand crib, Emma voiced her concern. "You've been coming by a lot lately. How long will this last? What happens when it stops being convenient for you?" Michael paused, his hand still on the crib, and looked her in the eyes. "It's not about convenience," he said firmly. "I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be. I know I've given you every reason to doubt me, but I'm not going anywhere." Emma wanted to believe him, but old wounds made her cautious. "And what happens when your other life, your wife, your business, starts pulling you away again?" she asked softly. "I'm not going to let myself or this baby be an afterthought." Her words hurt, but Michael was undeterred. "I can't change the past, but I can do better now. I will do better," he promised. Emma didn't respond immediately. She searched his face for any sign of insincerity. Finally, she nodded, though the doubt in her eyes remained. It was a small step, a hint that maybe, with time and effort, he could earn back her trust. Meanwhile, Chloe's patience with Michael had worn thin. Noticing his frequent absences and distracted behavior, she hired a private investigator to uncover the truth. It wasn't a decision she took lightly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Michael was hiding something major. A week later, the investigator returned with photographs showing Michael visiting a modest apartment, spending hours there and even carrying groceries. What shocked her most was an image of a visibly pregnant Emma standing at the doorway, her hand protectively resting on her stomach as Michael watched. The truth hit Chloe like a tidal wave. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and deeply hurt. That evening, when Michael returned home, Chloe confronted him. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" she demanded, holding up one of the photographs. Michael froze, guilt written all over his face. "Chloe, I can explain," he started, but she cut him off. "Don't bother. These pictures say it all. You've been sneaking around with your ex and she's pregnant. Is the baby yours?" Her voice cracked with anger and despair. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes," he admitted, quietly. "The baby is mine." Chloe's breath caught, tears welling in her eyes. "I trusted you," she whispered. "I married you thinking we were building a future together, and now this. I need to know where you stand. It's either me or her. You can't have both." Her ultimatum left Michael speechless. He realized he couldn't keep living a double life, yet the choice felt impossible. Chloe stormed out, slamming the door, leaving Michael alone with the crushing weight of his decisions. For the first time, he understood just how much he stood to lose and how far-reaching the consequences of his actions had become. Michael spent the night wrestling with Chloe's ultimatum. The decision before him was agonizing. Stay with Chloe, the woman he'd promised to love and cherish, or step up for Emma and their unborn child. Both choices carrying immense consequences. As dawn broke, Michael realized he couldn't delay any longer. He owed it to Chloe, Emma, and himself to face the truth and make a decision. Later that morning, he found Chloe in the kitchen, sitting with a cup of coffee, her eyes red from crying. "Chloe," he began softly, sitting across from her. "We need to talk." Her expression hardened. "I'm listening," she said coldly. Michael took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "I never meant for any of this to happen, but I can't ignore my responsibility to Emma and the baby. This isn't just about me. It's about doing what's right for them." Chloe's eyes flashed with anger. "And what about me, Michael? What about our marriage? Do I mean so little to you?" Her words stung, but Michael didn't waver. "This isn't about choosing between you and her," he said. "It's about stepping up as a father, I don't want to hurt you, but I can't turn my back on my child. Chloe stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. You've already hurt me, Michael. You made your choice the moment you went back to her. She turned away, trembling, with tears. I can't do this anymore. I deserve someone who puts me first. Her words were a final blow. Michael realized there was no saving their marriage. With Chloe effectively gone from his life, he turned his full attention to Emma and their unborn child. The next day, he visited Emma's apartment again, feeling both determined and anxious. When Emma opened the door, her expression was wary. "What are you doing here?" she asked cautiously. Michael took a deep breath and said, "I've made my decision. Chloe and I are finished. I'm here for you and the baby, whatever that means." Emma's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly masked her emotions. "What happens when things get tough?" she asked. "Are you going to disappear again?" Though her skepticism was understandable, Michael was resolute. "I won't walk away this time. I know I've failed you before, but I'm not that man anymore. I want to be here for you, for the baby, and for everything." Emma studied him for a long moment. "Words are easy," she said quietly. "Prove it." Michael nodded. "I will. Whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Michael set out to prove his commitment. He attended every doctor's appointment with Emma, helped her prepare for the baby, and took on extra responsibilities to ease her burden. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild her trust, even though he knew it wouldn't be an overnight process. For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of purpose beyond his career. He was no longer the man who put ambition above all else, and that realization brought him a deep sense of peace, even though the future was still uncertain. He had chosen responsibility, and he was determined to make things right, no matter what the cost. Rebuilding trust with Emma was one of the hardest challenges he'd ever faced, but he was fully committed. Emma still carried the scars of their past and remained cautious about his promises. Yet Michael made every effort to show her that he had changed. He started with small gestures, arriving on time for appointments, bringing essential items for the baby, and helping around her apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One day, while they were setting up a new bassinet Michael had bought, Emma finally broke the silence. "Why now, Michael?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with pain. "Why are you doing all of this when you couldn't even be there for me when we were married?" Michael paused, his hands gripping the edge of the bassinet. "Because I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice raw. "I let my ambition blind me to what really mattered. I thought success would make me complete, but it only left me empty. I'm not proud of who I was, Emma, but I'm trying to be better. For you, for the baby, and for myself." Emma looked at the bassinet for a long moment before speaking again, her voice filled with vulnerability. "I want to believe you, Michael. I really do. But I can't let myself get hurt again." His heart ached at her words, a painful reminder of how deeply he had failed her in the past. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," he said, gently, "but I promise I'll keep showing up every single day until you know I'm here to stay." Emma slowly nodded, and though her expression remained guarded, a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes, a small victory that meant everything to Michael. As Emma's due date approached, Michael and Emma began discussing how they would co-parent. The conversations were awkward at first, laden with unspoken tension and remnants of old wounds. Emma was adamant about keeping her independence, reminding Michael that she had managed on her own for months before he re-entered her life. "I don't want you to think you can just waltz in and take over," she said firmly during one conversation. "This is still my life, and I won't let you dictate how things go." Michael nodded, understanding her need for control. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he assured her. "I just want to be involved in whatever way you're comfortable with." Over time, their discussions became more productive. They agreed that Michael would be present at the birth and take on a significant role in the baby's life, emotionally, physically, and financially. Michael even set up a nursery in his home, promising that it wasn't about taking the baby away from Emma, but about ensuring that their child had everything needed. Though Emma was initially hesitant, she eventually agreed, realizing that Michael's intentions were genuine. For the first time in a long while, she began to see glimpses of the man she had once loved, a man determined to make up for his past mistakes. One afternoon, while sorting through baby clothes together, Michael found himself laughing at Emma's dry remark about one of the outfits. "Who in their right mind picks neon yellow for a baby?" she quipped, holding up a onesie. Michael chuckled, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. The moment was simple, yet significant, a reminder of the connection they had once shared. Although they still had a long way to go, both Michael and Emma started feeling hopeful about the future, not just for the baby but for themselves as well. Meanwhile, Chloe was overwhelmed by anger and humiliation. Her once perfect life had crumbled in just a few weeks. From being a newlywed, she now felt like an afterthought, a betrayal that cut deep. Unable to accept that Michael could simply walk away from their marriage without consequences, Chloe used her social connections to spread subtle rumors about his personal life, painting him as untrustworthy and irresponsible. Initially, the whispers stayed within their social circle, but soon they spread widely, causing some of Michael's business deals to fall through and invitations to exclusive events to dry up. Michael soon realized that Chloe was behind the sudden shift, but confronting her proved fruitless. "You made your choice," she said coldly over a tense phone call. "You'll have to live with the consequences." Though frustrated by her actions, Michael refused to let them derail his commitment. "I've lost contracts before," he told Emma one evening while unpacking a delivery of diapers, "but I've never lost a chance to do what's right. Let her spread her rumors. I won't let it stop me from being here for you." Emma watched his unwavering determination, and for the first time, a flicker of admiration sparked within her. She began to believe that Michael's priorities had truly shifted, and as Chloe's revenge escalated, his focus on Emma and the baby only strengthened the bond between them. Then, unexpectedly, Emma went into labor one late evening while Michael was on his way to her with groceries. In a panic, she called him, her voice shaky and strained. "It's time," she managed to say between contractions. Michael's heart raced as he dropped everything and sped to her apartment, ignoring honking horns on the street. When he arrived, Emma was sitting on the couch, pale and drenched in sweat. "We need to get to the hospital," she said weakly, clutching her belly. Michael didn't hesitate. He gently helped her to her feet and guided her to the car. The drive was tense, the air thick with fear and anticipation. As another contraction hit, Emma gripped the seat tightly. "Breathe," Michael urged, trying to keep his voice calm despite his own nerves. "You're doing great. We're almost there." Emma shot him a sharp look between labored breaths. "Easy for you to say," she muttered, her humor intact, despite the pain. At the hospital, nurses whisked Emma away, leaving Michael pacing anxiously in the waiting room. The reality of becoming a father hit him like a tidal wave. Hours later, the cry of a newborn echoed through the hall, and a smiling nurse called Michael's name. "Would you like to meet your daughter?" she asked. Michael felt his knees weaken as he followed her into the delivery room, where he saw Emma cradling a tiny, swaddled bundle. Exhausted yet radiant, Emma handed the baby to him. Michael's hands trembled as he held his daughter for the first time. Her little fingers curled around his, and tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your dad." In that moment, everything else, the past mistakes, the betrayal, the guilt, melted away, leaving only the overwhelming joy of holding new life. The days after the birth were a whirlwind. Michael and Emma worked together to care for their daughter, whom they named Ava, a name symbolizing grace and renewal. Every moment with Ava felt like a second chance for Michael. He marveled at her tiny features, her soft coos, and the way she seemed to calm him whenever he held her. Despite the sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of parenthood, he found a happiness he hadn't known in years. Emma, still cautious at first, began to see a side of Michael she had never witnessed before. He was attentive, patient, and completely devoted to their daughter. He stayed with them long after the nurses suggested he rest, insisting on being there for every checkup and milestone. One evening, as Emma watched Michael rock Ava to sleep, a deep emotion welled up in her. She couldn't deny that he was truly trying to make amends for the past, and though her walls were still partly intact, cracks were beginning to form. When they brought Ava home, Michael surprised Emma with a fully furnished nursery in his house. "I wanted her to have everything she needs," he explained softly. Emma was touched, though still cautious. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "but don't think that a fancy nursery fixes everything." Michael nodded, understanding her caution. "I'm not trying to make up for the past with material things. I just want to give her the best start in life." Emma couldn't argue with that, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, Michael was really here to stay. On a quiet afternoon, as Ava napped peacefully in her crib, Emma and Michael sat together in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a warm glow, but a heavy silence hung between them. They both knew there were unresolved issues, wounds that hadn't fully healed. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "We need to talk about everything," she said. Michael nodded, his expression serious. "I've been waiting for you to be ready," he replied softly. Emma took a deep breath, her hands clutched together. "Do you know how much it hurt when you put everything else before me? I gave you everything, Michael. I supported you, and I just wanted you to notice me. But you were so caught up in your work that I felt invisible." Michael's chest tightened as her words pierced him. "I was selfish," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was doing it for both of us, but I see now that I was only thinking of myself. I didn't realize what I was losing until it was too late." Their conversation was raw and painful, but necessary. They talked about their past, the mistakes they had made, and how they had hurt each other. For the first time, they allowed themselves to be truly vulnerable, shedding the layers of pride and resentment that had built up over the years. As the sun set, there was a sense of relief, a feeling that, while the past couldn't be changed, it didn't have to dictate their future. "I forgive you," Emma whispered through tears, "but you have to show me that things will be different this time." Michael reached for her hand, his grip gentle yet determined. "I promise I'll be better, for you and for Ava. I'll be the man you deserve." With Ava now a central part of their lives, Michael and Emma began to redefine what family meant. Though their history was filled with pain and disappointment, their shared commitment to their daughter became the foundation for a new beginning. Michael rearranged his work schedule to spend more time with Ava, and Emma, though still cautious, couldn't help but notice the changes in him. She watched as he cradled their daughter, sang softly to her, and even fumbled through diaper changes. Aoe, far cry from the man consumed by ambition he once knew. One evening, as Michael prepared a bottle for Ava, Emma observed quietly from the doorway. "You're getting really good at this," she remarked with a small smile. Michael glanced over his shoulder and replied softly, "I had a great teacher." That moment was simple yet significant. For the first time, Emma began to see Michael not as the man who had once let her down, but as a caring father and a partner truly trying to make amends. Gradually her guard began to lower. Michael would often bring dinner to her apartment, and the three of them would share simple moments of laughter. Emma started opening up about her hopes and fears for the future. Though the wounds of their past hadn't completely healed, they were slowly mending, one day at a time. For the first time in years, both Michael and Emma felt hopeful not just for Ava, but for themselves as well. As the months went by, the bond between Michael and Emma deepened. What had begun as a tentative co-parenting arrangement evolved into something neither had expected. They started spending more time together, not just for Ava, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Michael found himself admiring Emma's strength and resilience. She was no longer the woman who had once walked away, nor was he the man who had taken her for granted. Both had grown and changed, and their connection felt stronger than ever before. One evening, after putting Ava to bed, they sat on the couch, sipping tea and talking about their day. The conversation shifted to memories, cherished moments and regrets alike. "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" Emma asked softly, looking down at her cup. Michael hesitated, his heart heavy with vulnerability. "All the time," he admitted. "But I also think about what could be." His words hung in the air, full of meaning. Emma looked up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Michael reached out, taking her hand. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one, for Ava and for us. I want to try again, to build a life the right way this time." Tears filled Emma's eyes, but she didn't pull away. "It won't be easy," she said quietly. "We have a lot to work through." Michael squeezed her hand. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." In that moment, the walls Emma had built around her heart began to crumble, and she allowed herself to hope that they might find their way back to each other. Months later, Michael stood at the altar of a small, intimate chapel, his heart pounding, as he watched Emma walk toward him. She was radiant in a simple white dress, her natural beauty glowing in the soft light. Ava, now a cheerful toddler, toddled down the aisle ahead of her, carrying a small bouquet and giggling as petals fell. The scene was nothing like the extravagant wedding Michael had once planned with Chloe, but it was perfect in every way that mattered. There were no secrets or doubts now, only love, forgiveness, and the promise of a new beginning. As Emma reached his side, Michael took her hands and said softly, "You've given me more than I ever deserved. A second chance, a family, and the chance to be the man I always wanted to be. I'll spend my life making sure I never let you down again." Emma smiled through tears. "I never thought we'd get here, but I'm glad we did. This is where we were meant to be." The simple, heartfelt ceremony was witnessed by close friends and family. As Michael slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling he had never known before. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the culmination of a long, painful journey, a testament to the power of love, redemption, and resilience. After exchanging vows, they shared a tender, triumphant kiss, sealing the promise of their future together. Later that evening, as they danced under the stars with Ava in their arms, Michael and Emma couldn't stop smiling. Their journey had been far from perfect, but it had led them to this moment, a moment where their love, tested by time and trials, had finally found its way home. They were a family now, and the future was theirs to build together. And that's the end of the story. What did you take away from it? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, like this story if it touched you, and subscribe to stay updated on our next releases. Also, share this with someone who might find it interesting. Thank you for reading.